Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Croccast podcast. I'm your host, Nate, and today I'm joined by my two friends, Micah and Josiah Mould, who are the owners of Serpents and Salamanders. Hey, guys, welcome to the show.
Hey,
Hey,
thanks for having.
yeah, thanks.
So, you want to get started on how you two got into herpetoculture and herpetology and reptiles and amphibians in general?
It is it is quite the story. Josiah, do you want to start off, and I'll fill things in?
Yeah, you'll probably be able to remember some things that I don't. So, Mike and I had the privilege of growing up in West Africa. Our parents were missionaries in Guinea. So, we went there when I was 3 years old. Mike would have been one and a half, something like that.
Yeah,
So,
one and a half.
so from a very early age, we were exposed to just a menagerie of different critters over there. And I honestly don't know exactly how or what the specific catalyst was, but I just remember pretty much anything we could catch, we were trying to catch and keep it somehow. Um, we weren't very good at it. That's because we didn't really know anything. Um, but yeah, I just remember any chance we were out there catching lizards. Um, we tried to stay away from the snakes since we didn't really know anything about them, and a lot of them are venomous. At least that's what we were told. Um, but yeah, in our yard we had any place we could stock with like fish. We would put water and put fish in. We had this like pit. My dad built it to make cheese, oddly enough, but that didn't pan out, and so we filled it with whatever we could catch. So it was a frog pit for a while. We kept a Nile monitor in it for a little bit. Um, just like a little bit of everything. At night we would like keep chameleons in our rooms. Like they would hang out on our mosquito nets, and we would hope that they would eat the mosquitoes that got into the room. Um, I don't know what else. What else did we have? We had a little bit of everything. I know we had some parrots for a little bit.
Yeah, I mean
Some
the list goes on, and
tortoises.
yeah,
Sorry.
we had tortoises at one point where we bought them and we didn't know what to do with them, so we just let them go in the yard. And I think one stuck around for a while. But every once in a while, we'd forget about it, and then a few months later, we'd see the tortoise walking through the backyard. Um, Trying to think of what other things. I remember, digging up red-headed agama eggs and putting them in buckets to hatch. I never had much success doing that, but there were always, one or two would hatch out. So it was quite the experience for sure.
Yeah, I remember your dad once told me you guys had a pangolin for a while.
We did have a pet pangolin.
We
Unfortunately,
did. Go ahead,
unfortunately,
Josiah.
yeah, unfortunately, it didn't live as long as it probably should have. Um, yeah, it was one of those things we know someone brought it by, and we just kind of begged our dad to buy it. So he humored us and did, and I mean, it did okay for a while. I mean, it just crawl around the house and it would eat ants off the floor because we had ants in our house. Um, but yeah, it just ended up dying one day. But I mean, it was. I don't know if you ever had any interactions with a pangolin, but they're the chillest animals. Like it would actually climb up into our bunks and like sleep with us at night. It was the coolest little animal, but I don't know how long it ended up living, but not nearly as long as it should have. And of course, they're incredibly endangered now because of
Yeah.
uh, the bushmeat trade and maybe the pet trade too. I'm not sure.
Right, and that's how we ended up getting it. It was a young animal that its mother had been shot for bushmeat. So there was someone just selling this baby pangolin on the side of the. Well, was it the side or was it the airport? I can't remember. I
You
think it
know,
was.
now,
I think it
now
was.
that I talk about it, I think they had it at the airport, and we bought it at the airport. I think you're right.
Yeah. So for reference, overseas, a lot of places at those international airports, that's where people will take like baby animals and sell them because they're trying to sell them to tourists and to Europeans kind of traveling through, so that you'll see all the most random baby animals at the airports: chimpanzees, um, dikers, dik-diks, bushbuck, tiny little cute babies. But then, obviously they grow up to be not necessarily the most ideal pets. But yeah, it was a pretty cool pet. I still remember we would take him out to the yard. He would dig up ant hills. So I would get another one if I could.
So after you guys came back to the States, you actually you went to school, and we actually have kind of a mutual mentor from our academic days. You want to go into that?
Yeah, sure.
So sorry, we keep interrupting each other here.
Sorry.
So yeah, we all kind of crossed paths, not in the same years, but with the same professor, Dr. Chris Carmichael. And while he didn't give me my love of reptiles, he definitely helped me look at reptile keeping in a different way. I had the privilege of working in a serpentarium for several years. While I was there, I managed a lot of the larger pythons, lesser sundaes, the retics, his boas, the alligators, black throat monitors. It gave me some good hands-on experience with some larger constrictors before I kind of moved on and expanded out my views. Did you want to add in on that, Josiah?
Yeah. So yeah, I think my interests diverged a little different from I guess you guys in from the reptile realm. I guess I wanted to name drop one of my high school teachers though. When we came back to the States, one of my biology teachers' name was Dave Sprang.
Oh yeah.
And I already had that interest in wildlife, but like he kind of fostered that, and really like just with a lot of hands-on classes, taking zoology, ornithology. But specifically in his zoology class, we went out and we learned about like vernal pools and, the ambystomid salamanders and that life cycle. And I think that was probably a little bit of a catalyst for me, at least, where I diverged and went on to kind of foster my interest in salamanders. And while it wasn't entirely, I didn't follow that entirely with Dr. C. That is definitely the direction I went with him because of his background working, with that zoo and wildlife biology major there. So that I guess I wanted to backtrack a little bit to say how I got to Malone and working with Dr. C.
Yeah, I completely forgot that we also have Mr. Sprang in common as well.
Yeah, that's true. He was, I would say, definitely one of the best teachers I've ever had.
Oh yeah.
And it just really, at least for me, I've always had a love for wildlife. In all aspects of wildlife. I love birds. I love reptiles. I love amphibians. I love insects. I love mammals. I love everything. But Dr. Sprang really gave me that scientific mind. That insight to when you're out in nature. Questioning everything that you see, and wanting to know more about it and diving into it, and get over the superficial. I think he really helped drive that home, and yeah, definitely was a major mentor to get me where I am today.
So after you guys graduated college, not as your main career, but as more of a side business, you guys started up Serpents and Salamanders, which, by the way, is one of my favorite local reptile herpetoculture businesses, might I add.
Shout out.
Yeah, free advertisement. Take it where you can.
We don't advertise very well, so we'll take it.
So you guys want to go into how you started that up?
Take it away, Josiah.
All right, I guess I'll start. So after we graduated from college, we still, I guess you could say we got real jobs, but, we still had this passion, and it kind of, was on the hobbyist side of things since we didn't really pursue it from an education, I guess, perspective, or I guess formal education, I should say. So I really started to focus on keeping different species of newts and salamanders, and it kind of opened up this whole new world to me because I knew, basically what we had here in Ohio, and there aren't any salamanders really in West Africa. So I didn't know a whole lot about them. And that was around the time too where I was starting to discover these forums on the internet, and I discovered this whole underground community of all these other keepers, and I discovered all these other species that I had no idea existed. And at first, it was kind of like, oh, I have to have them all, you know?
Yeah.
But thankfully, I didn't get everything at once, and I've slowly kind of, as I've gained experience, kind of gathered a little bit here and there. And we got to the point where, you know, the fun part was I had these animals, I was learning about them in captivity, and, you know, the next step is not just letting them thrive, but also seeing them reproduce. And I've always been fascinated by the amphibian life cycle, specifically with caudates. So like, yeah, just the next logical step for me was to start, you know, working with reproducing them. And newts and salamanders can produce a lot of offspring. So at that point, I was like, well, I could give them away, but it is somewhat costly to maintain these animals. So I started going down to the Columbus Reptile Show, and I would, you know, sell some here or there to the vendors down there. And eventually, over time, we started getting our own table, just because it was more. We just had more to sell. I guess you could say that's a very, I guess, high level explanation, at least of my side of things. I don't know if you want to touch a little bit on where you got to where you're at, Micah.
Yeah, so I mean, I think in some ways it mirrors it. Obviously, you have taken your passion, the amphibian side, and I have the love for things scaly. So it's where we get that nice divide, and the yin and the yang, you know, the serpents and the salamanders. But for me, it really started, I would say, out of college as well. You know, I kept a few species of rat snake, and had a few ball pythons at the time. And then, breeding a couple and having those extra offspring. And I did the same thing, you know, head down to Columbus or, you know, call up some of my reptile friends and kind of wholesale them off. And then, you know, you make a few bucks off of that and you're like, well, I can at least cover my expenses here. And then, you know, buy a few snakes here, a few snakes there, a lizard here. And now, it's a pretty sizable and impressive collection, I would say. But it's still, for me, it's obviously not my full-time job or anything. It's just, I love keeping the animals. I love, you know, watching them go through their natural life cycles, and, you know, collecting eggs is still one of my favorite things to do. There's no better morning than walking into the reptile room and seeing those pearly whites. You know, I still probably get as excited now as I did the first time I ever bred a corn snake. So yeah, it's been a lot of fun to see the business grow over the years, and we continue to grow every year.
So you want to go into some of the stuff you guys keep, starting with you, Josiah?
Yeah, sure. So some of the first species I kept were some of the ones that were available just commonly in like your mom and pop stores. So I started out with some firebelly newts and some warty newts and some paddle-tail newts. And those species have kind of remained some of like my favorites. I really enjoy those Asian species. And then I also really enjoyed the crested newts from Europe. Marble newts are one of the first ones I acquired, and there's this beautiful like emerald green newt with when they're younger they have a bright orange stripe down their back, and then the males during the breeding season they develop this, you know, impressive crest and this really high fin on their tail. So right now I'm not even sure how many species I have, I'll be honest. Probably should have wrote it down before we got here, but I have it's less than 20, but I have, let's see, probably 3 or 4 species of crested newts. I have a few species of their like the small European pond newts, like the palmate newt and the smooth newt. I have, you know, some of those. I still have some firebelly newts. I have a few warty newts. I still have a pair of paddle tails. Those are probably still one of my favorites. I started to keep those Iranian newts. So I have some Kaisers and then the Crocatus newts. Those are a lot of fun, very colorful. And then I recently started getting into some of the European fire salamanders as well. Those are for whatever reason, I didn't have as much interest in the terrestrial species when I first started out, and I wish I had, because yes, some of these species are just stunning in some of the colors that they exhibit. Um, so I think that's about. Well, my last count was about 16 or 17 species, and yeah, I've definitely acquired those over the years. I didn't start out that way. It's been about 10 years, I think, since I've actually been keeping. So I've built up that collection in that amount of time.
Okay. What about you, Josiah? I mean, Micah. Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, no problem. So I have a wide variety of colubrids and pythons. And also I monitors are definitely a passion of mine. So I have a few species. I range, like rat snakes is really where I started, keeping some of the New World and Old World, so I keep a pretty large collection of Texas rat snakes and all the morphs associated with that. But I also have Everglades rat snakes, white-sided rat snakes. For the Old World side, I have a whole range, the rhino rat snakes, red mountain racers, the coxeye, have mandarin rats, tiger rat snakes, a lot of rat snakes, corn snakes, which are obviously also a rat snake. But then I also have a pretty wide range of other North American colubrids as well, such as like the Florida king snakes. I'm a huge fan of Florida king snakes. I have a pretty wide variety of Florida king snake more. What else do I have? I have quite a few snakes. I have a group of Theori kings. I have the Japanese rat snakes as well. I think I missed those earlier. The California king snakes. And then a few bull snakes. I'm still in the process of building my bull snake collection. I just started buying into them within the last 2 years. So I only have a few, but I should be producing a few clutches next year. As far for pythons, I have your usual ball pythons. I've dabbled in Burmese, but I tend to keep things that are a little bit more smaller, more manageable. The largest snake I currently have is the boa constrictors. I have a few, or a boa emperor, I guess would be the proper term. I have a few morphs of those. And then for lizards, I keep the Aki monitors, green tree monitors. I have Nile monitor, some black throat monitors. I keep a few species of day gecko, the peacocks and the gold dusts and the line day geckos. It's starting to sound like a lot of animals.
Yeah.
And then a few melt snakes. So yeah, it's a pretty sizable collection, like I said, and it's something that I've grown over the years, and I have some animals that I'm just really really proud of, and I'm starting to get into fourth generation that I've produced, which is awesome to see. Where I have the grandparents and great grandparents, and I still have those animals in my collection, and I'm seeing the offspring of the offspring of the offspring produce. So it's something I'm definitely really proud of.
And you also recently got into crocodilians a little bit as well.
I knew you were going to mention that. Yes, I did impulse buy a group of caimans, the smooth front caiman. So they're still juveniles, but they're doing really really well for me. Little eating machines. And I will say, even though this hurts me to say a little bit in front of you, I am enjoying them quite a bit. So I'm not saying I'm going to expand my crocodilian collection out, but they have been a lot of fun.
Okay, so in terms of your business, what we say is be your main market in terms of who you sell to.
So for me, I definitely have some high dollar rare animals. But the majority of what I produce and what I sell is to entry level hobbyists. I produce a lot of corn snakes, king snakes, milk snakes, some lower dollar animals. but they're animals that are very hardy. They do well in captivity, and it's an animal that you can sell to a beginner keeper, and talk to them about care, get them excited, bring them into the reptile hobby. Those are the clients that I kind of target. It's, at least for me, I have a hard time breeding some of my more sensitive animals and selling them. But I do occasionally, but it just, for the audience that we target, it just gets a little bit more difficult. And for me, I really love just, having those entry level people and, getting excited about keeping reptiles and, teaching them entry level things about reptile care. And corn snake, it's a fantastic first snake that I would, encourage all parents to get their child their first pet corn snake. But I digress.
I would say on the Newton salamander side of things, I don't sell a lot of them locally. I find when we're at the shows, a lot of my conversation is educational for people. Like, it's just not something that most of them have seen before. I get a lot of like, oh, I used to catch those in my backyard. I'm like, well, no, but
Unless you grew up in Iran.
yeah. So that is one angle I seem to be taking at the shows, and I do enjoy it. And I never encourage anyone to buy something, especially like a Newton or salamander, on impulse. I mean, no animal really, but they're not something that you're just going to come to a show without having anything set up and then take home and then give it to your kids. Like, it's just, not good for the animal. It's not going to be a good experience for the people either, because it's probably going to die. So I can't remember countless times I've probably, given the same spiel to people down at Columbus, but part of me gets frustrated sometimes. But when you get that person that has come to multiple shows, they've done their research outside of the show, and they're like, hey man, I heard what you said, and I'm working on this vivarium, I'll show you this picture, let me know what you think. And then maybe next month I'll purchase one. Like, that to me is really rewarding, because I know that person is going to then, take care of the animal, and they're going to get as much enjoyment out of it as I have, because, it's a lot of work goes into raising these animals. And, you don't want them to just be a throwaway pet. I don't want to just sell it just to sell it. There's got to be more to it. So all that to say, I don't sell a lot of Newton salamanders locally. There's not a huge market in Ohio. Most of those are online if we post on like Morph Market or Fauna Classifieds. California probably buys most of them. A bigger market out there, and even overseas. So like, we don't directly export, but like Korea, there's a huge hobby over there with like the small terrarium animals. So basically what they'll do is they got their export guy, and they'll go around, they'll look for all these animals, and then they'll come to us. And they're like, oh yeah, we want a whole bunch of those to sell at our store. And then we'll ship them off to them, and then they get them exported. But yeah, I'd say most of the newts sell, or most of those are online. Yeah, not a lot of local sales.
Right.
So,
And I joke that we sell the education piece, because like Josiah said, half of what we do is the educating people, talking to them about the basic care, and so a lot of it does sometimes seem redundant, but I think that's definitely an important part of our business model. We give out our business cards, and we want people to come back and talk to us if they have problems, and we'll walk them through it. Because I think a lot of people, the way they view reptiles is that first time pet that they just kind of buy for their kid and forget about. And we really want to kind of change that mentality, I think. And when you're dealing with like I said, an amphibian, there isn't much room for error. So we want to make sure that it's going to the right home for someone who knows what they're doing.
Okay, so that whole majority of your market being like, at least for your Newton salamanders, being either out of state or overseas, how would this whole U.S. Competes Act? What are your takes on it?
I mean, strictly from a small business standpoint, for at least the salamander side of the business, I would be dead in the water. I mean, I said Ohio is not that big of a market for caudates. I might sell one a show if that. So, I mean, the whole thing has been very frustrating just because there is a lot of misinformation around it. And originally, I mean, even in 2016, when U.S. Fish and Wildlife tried to use the Lacey Act to ban everything. Like I almost gave up keeping entirely back then because I was like, I mean, what am I going to do if I can't like work with, because there's not a whole lot of hobbyists. There aren't many people that buy stuff, but there aren't a whole lot of even serious hobbyists in Ohio. So like it kind of really shuts down the ability to network with other keepers. So I almost got rid of everything back then. I'm glad I didn't. And we actually expanded. So yes, definitely frustrated. Probably be careful how I say this, but I mean, from one, like I can see both sides of the argument, because there are some people that I definitely recognize the risk that B-Sal is, and like I think I was definitely for the import ban, because just the way that newts and salamanders were imported, they were a throwaway animal. I mean, you could buy fire belly newts wholesale for like 50 cents, and then you could buy them for like $3 at a show. Paddletail newts for $5, and they're just animals like it's just not good for those populations of wild, and then how they're handled once they get here. Like it just doesn't encourage people to put in the time to learn about them and then take care of them. They just go ahead and put them in with their goldfish and then forget about it. So like I definitely understand that that import ban. The interstate didn't make as much sense to me, especially with animals that were already here, and if they were proven to be disease free. I mean, my animals are all healthy. Like I didn't see as big a concern with the animals that are already in captivity. So hopefully I articulated that well enough that I'm very frustrated with it, but I can see both sides of the aisle. But it definitely felt like a huge overreach, and I know newts and salamanders are a small fringe, but there's a lot of other things in that bill that could have much larger ramifications down the line.
Right, and I think that's the important point. If the Senate's voting in, is it 2 months now? And if it passes, which it probably will, Josiah's 18 species, he's essentially locked in Ohio, and as far as what that would do to the business, I think that's self-explanatory. But it's the overreaching things in that bill that are even more concerning to me, even outside of the amphibian ban, that it pretty much gives the Fish and Game the power to expand exponentially, and it gives the keepers very, very little power or insight on it. And maybe in 2 months, your average keeper is not going to feel the impact outside of some of your amphibian keepers. But I think in 5 years, we're going to be having a very different conversation on what the actual impact is. So I definitely would encourage anybody to continue to research and continue to contact your senators, call your senators, because it's a serious problem, and it's definitely, I think, an overreach is going to be an understatement when we're having this conversation looking back at it.
Yeah. So also probably a good idea to support USARC as well.
Yes, you should all be members.
Yep.
Support those who support you. I mean, USARC has done a great job so far keeping us informed and fighting the battles for us, but that legal work's not free, so a free shout out to them, I guess. It's the least we could do.
Yeah, and back when the ban originally came through, I mean, they were they were, took it to court and they got the original interstate, I guess, interpretation of the Lacey Act overturned. So, the interstate ban was no longer in effect. But yeah, I mean, there was almost a year there where we thought things were pretty much shut down. So.
Right.
So, Micah, in particular, what species have you had success working with and breeding with?
That's a very open-ended question, and I've bred quite a few species now. Nothing I would say too challenging. The one species I was probably most proud of, which unfortunately ended in failure so far, is my green tree monitors. I did get a clutch last fall, 3 good eggs, but unfortunately I botched the incubation. So granted, eggs are particularly sensitive, and I would say green tree monitor eggs even more so, to humidity fluctuations and temperature fluctuations. So I had 1 egg go almost full term, but then it ended up finding it dead in the egg. But my female, she is starting to cycle again. The male's been breeding her. So I am expecting another clutch here soon. And I've changed up my incubation tactics. Because I was incubating the same as I do my Ackie eggs, which I've had success with my Ackies. But from my research and talking to a few of my friends who have successfully bred them, they're just much more sensitive to that humidity in the box, especially later in incubation. So I'm hoping for success this next time around. But as far as overall success, I mean, I've bred, you name a common species in the hobby, I've probably bred it at one point or another. I'm someone who I like to dabble in a project and then shift on to the next project once I have success. So a wide variety of colubrids, small lizards, monitor lizards, you name it.
And what about you, Josiah?
So I don't know if I've bred anything that would be considered too challenging, at least in the Newton salamander world. What I produce the most of is probably the marbled newts, just because I've had them the longest. That was one of the first species I've bred. Let's see. Yeah, so the marbled newts, I've got the fire belly newts. I've bred those before. Chinese warty newts, I've had those reproduce. Alpine newts, rib newts, southern crested newts, Danube crested newts, palmite newts, smooth newts. The Nerugus crocatus, the Lake Ermia newts, I've produced those. Yeah, so with newts and salamanders, a lot of getting them to lay eggs isn't the hard part. It's like raising the young is the challenging part, because they need small live food. So I've dabbled in a few techniques to make it easier, but I mean it's still a lot of little mouths to feed. The main. Sorry, go ahead.
Forget about axolotls.
What's
Quite
that?
the accomplishment.
Axolotl?
Don't forget about axolotls.
Oh yeah, I have produced a lot of axolotls too. I forget what I was saying.
A lot of little mouths to feed.
Oh yeah, so I mean, so essentially with newts, you got all your tank space for the adults, and then 6 months out of the year, you pretty much have to double all that space to house all the offspring. So just space can be a challenge, especially as I keep adding tanks for new species each year, it seems like. So basically what I do is I'm trying to get more towards live aquatic foods that are freshwater, but I still do rely a little bit on hatching brine shrimp to feed the smallest of the newt larvae. And I get them onto live foods as soon as possible, like Daphnia, chopped blackworms, white worms, like small live foods like that. Yeah. So yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't know if I've bred anything that is considered super rare or challenging yet, but the ultimate goal is to breed my paddle-tailed newts.
So,
But
so a lot of those newts, those are most of your newts and salamanders are usually from temperate regions, right?
yeah, so in order to get them to breed, they need like a cool winter period, kind of like a brumation sort of, and that basically induces them to breed in the spring. So most of mine are actually starting to lay eggs right now. The crested newts have already started laying. The palmate newts, marbled newts just started laying. The crocatus have been laying. I'm trying to think what else might be coming up here soon. So yeah, it's a fun time of year to see all the raising the larvae is a lot of fun, but even just the courtship that you see in the water is neat. The males will do this little dance for the females, especially with the crested newts with their mating dress. They're just spectacular little animals that a lot of people just have no idea about them. Like I said, everyone at the show thinks they're little lizards. So that that is where I'm at right now. Hoping some species breed a little later in the year. I have some firebelly newts that'll probably start laying in a few months. I have the blue-tailed firebelly newts, and I also have some Japanese firebelly newts that hopefully will both lay a little later this year. Um, the one species that hasn't bred for me is or the genus I should say, is the one of the crocodile newts, the Tylototriton. Um, I have, but I believe they're varicosis. I don't know if I'm saying that right, like the Himalayan knobby newt. I have two different bloodlines, and I'm really hopeful that I'll get eggs from both of them this year. But it's still a little cold and a little early for them. But I did see some courtship for one of the groups last year, so I am optimistic we'll get something this year.
Uh, so, since not a lot of people keep newts, you want to give a little rundown about basic husbandry for them?
Yeah, sure. So what I tell for most of the species I keep, I tell most people the same thing. They just need cool, clean water. Um, and then a lot of the other stuff is like not necessarily cool, clean water, and then a good diet. And a lot of the other stuff, as far as like decorations and substrate, is somewhat optional. I've never measured, like I don't measure pH or anything with my water. Um, so from my experience, they are tolerant of a fairly wide range. I know some people, like some of the newts that come from like the Middle East and some of like those rocky streams, they try and put a little limestone in their water for like the Noruega species. I've messed around with that a little bit, but I don't find it to necessarily be a requirement because it's not in all my tanks. So my basic setup for the aquatic animals is going to be a sponge filter, um, and then enough water space to account for the animals in there, and then some plants. I only use a few species since my tanks get pretty cold in the winter. I only keep a few plants that do well in the cold water. The main one is guppy grass or naha grass. That seems to do really well in my water. And then I have a little bit of, I believe it's some strain of Java moss. It doesn't grow super well, but it does well enough that it doesn't die. And then, of course, the infamous duckweed is in all my tanks. um, so that I mean, it's a fairly simple setup. The main thing is that cool, clean water. If you can't keep them cool during the summer, that's where most people are going to fail. Um, and when I say cool, like I'm shooting for like 70 or below. Now there are a few species that don't mind those warmer temperatures, but like they're not one that most people are going to be. That's not something that I'm really going to be selling at the shows. Like some of the crocodile newts can handle some of those warmer temperatures, and just because the newts can handle some of those warmer temperatures for a little while doesn't mean that long term that it's going to be good for them. So I always shoot for below 70 if you can help it. As far as diet, um, I feed mine almost entirely earthworms. Um, I culture European earthworms and red wigglers, but the red wigglers no one really seems to like. And I've heard some people have had horror stories with them because of the secretions that they excrete. They've said that it's killed some newts in the past. I've never had that issue, but some of them definitely don't like the way they taste. So I usually stick to the European earthworms and then like chopped night crawlers for the adults. And then like the smaller ones, they'll eat a lot of black worms, white worms. I culture um, a lot of Daphne in the summer. So yeah, variety is key, but worms seem to be pretty much the best food that you can feed caudates. I do pellets from time to time. I'll feed there are there's some decent pellets out there, like the axolotl pellets seem to be pretty good. And I don't use them exclusively, but I know some people keep their axolotls exclusively on those pellets and they seem to do fine. So yeah, that good diet is key. And then aside from that, you need a tight fitting lid, because some of them, axolotls don't really climb, but they can jump. But something, yeah, that will keep the ones that have the tendency to climb in the water. But aside from that, yeah, I'm pretty much almost all air driven except for my paddle tail newts. I do have a power head in their tank. I've just kind of been messing around with the conditions in there to see if more water flow will encourage them to breed, but it's kind of just an experiment right now.
Okay. So I know this is kind of a broad question.
Yeah, sure.
But what are y'all's favorite animals, both just as a whole and the ones you keep?
Oh man, that's a good question.
That is pretty tough. I love everything, and I think my favorite animal is the animal I'm working with at the time. I do love a challenge when it comes to nailing down husbandry and figuring out some of those cues for breeding. Kind of going along those tracks of just figuring out animals. One species that I have had tremendous difficulty with, and I've been trying for many years to breed, is the tiger rat snakes. I know people have had success with them, but the people who have had success have not really been able to figure out where that success actually came from. It seems to be kind of a random occurrence still in captivity. Figuring out what those triggers are. I've messed with everything from temperature to humidity swings, feeding fluctuations, and I've had lots of breeding, but no eggs as yet. So I think some of those challenges is what makes this the most fun. But as far as favorite animal in my collection, oh man. Well, I would say probably right now it's my caiman lizard, which is one of my new acquisitions. I've really, really been enjoying the temperament of him. Very Tegu-esque in his temperament, but he just has that cool, overall cool look to him. Very, very calm animal. For being an imported animal, he's right out of the bag, he was pretty much like a puppy dog. So definitely a cool animal. But I love my monitors as well, all of them. I love my green trees and my Nile monitors. My black throats. They're all a lot of fun.
Yeah, I don't know if I can. Let me try. I'll try. So there's one species that I have that. So I've always had an affinity for the warty newts for whatever reason. They're not the most flashy, but I don't know if it's just because it's one of the first ones I had. But I've just always had an affinity towards them. So my favorite might be, and it's partially just because of the story behind it too, is I have two. They're called spot-tailed warty newts, and they're captive bred, but they're almost non-existent in captivity. And the person I got them from, they raised their adults from eggs that were laid in captivity as well. But the adults did not produce young until they were 10 years old. So like there's a huge long wait for these animals to be producing viable young. So mine are about 5 years old. I'm not even sure if I have a male and a female, but I can hope, right? But yeah, just because the story behind them and knowing where they came from is fascinating to me. But yeah, they're not the most flashy or brightly colored newt you'd ever see. They're pretty unassuming.
So what would be ultimate goal dream species for each one of you to keep?
I mean, it would never happen, but one of those I mean, I don't think I could even provide the right. I don't think the right conditions for it. But have you seen those pied Andrias, the Chinese giant salamanders?
Oh, okay.
Yeah, they're the pied ones. They look insane, and I know it would never happen. And I don't think I could provide the adequate environment for it. But like, I guess in the perfect world, if I could afford like a 20,000 gallon aquarium with a chiller and it was legal, then maybe something like that.
Yeah, we could all dream, right? That's a really tough question. I would, for me, the majority of the animals that I really want, I already have. One species that's definitely on my bucket list that I haven't quite gotten around to are the Shinosaura.
Oh yeah, you need
What's their common name? The Chinese crocodile lizard, I believe.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
That's a species that I've been looking at for a long time, but they're pretty rare in the hobby. They're slow breeders. And they're fairly pricey, so I'm kind of biding my time and waiting for a group of young animals to become available. So it's definitely on the bucket list. And then one other species that I'd love to own, it would be probably a Gila monster, but I don't know if it's necessarily on my bucket list. But if the right opportunity comes along, I'd probably pick one up. The Borneo earless monitor would be another species that I would love to own. But once again, those are fairly rare and hard to come by. And while I don't believe they're currently being imported, in the past, the animals that were available were fairly poor condition. So I couldn't bring myself to drop $5,000 on an animal that might die. So, maybe in the future.
I guess one other species that, I mean, while highly improbable, it's definitely more in the realm of the real world than the Andrias. But another warty newt is the Tamdao warty newt. I know there are some in the States, but odds of acquiring some captive offspring are pretty much nil, but it's at least more realistic to dream about than the other one.
Yeah. So, Micah, I had to ask this of you, but why do you love Nile monitors so much?
That's a great question. I mean, it's obviously it's a multi-variable equation. You got to factor in where I grew up. That's a lizard that I chased as a kid. I still remember vacationing in the Gambia, and at their resort, there were Nile monitors just everywhere. And we would, being extremely intelligent children, we would chase these 6-foot lizards and try and corner them and grab them. And I still remember the first one we cornered in a shower, and it just, in typical Nile monitor fashion, just whipped its tail around and smacked one of my friends right across the face. And I think from then on, I've just fallen in love with the lizard. So, I mean, it's a species I had the honor of catching and keeping as a child. And then also in 2018, we were able to travel back to Guinea, and I was able to actually catch another one as an adult, which was a pretty awesome experience. But outside of the personal connection I have to them, for me, they're one of the most beautiful monitors. I think it's really a shame that they're imported in such large numbers, where people buy them who really aren't prepared to handle them. They're a very large, a very strong, a very extremely intelligent monitor, and they have a pretty shy disposition, which makes them challenging for your average hobbyist. But overall, I would say that they're one of the most striking of the African monitors. And you really the intelligence, I definitely would consider them more intelligent than, and this is just personal opinion. I'm not basing any scientific fact on this at all. But I would consider them more intelligent than, say, like a black throat or a water monitor or a savanna monitor. Just the way they seem to calculate every move when they watch you. You can see it in their eyes. It's something that's always drawn me to them. And I made a reference, I think, earlier even today, that in some ways they do remind me of a croc monitor in that respect. If any of you have ever worked with a croc monitor before, they are extremely calculating, and extremely self-aware. And all monitors are intelligent, but I think there's just something special about a Nile. And not only that, but they're fairly sensitive animals. But they're not like I mentioned before, they're not an animal that for your average hobbyist by any means. But even experienced hobbyists, I think, sometimes can struggle to keep them successfully. They're not a species that are bred really in captivity, for multiple reasons. I guess I won't get into it too far, but there seems to be a lot of issues with females developing scarring on their ovaries in captivity, whether that's due to improper husbandry as they grow or diet. But there have been very few people who have successfully bred them. So that's definitely something on my bucket list.
So you also recently got some Senegal chameleons that you're hoping to breed, right?
Yeah, that's just another example of picking up animals that I used to love and catch as a child. I picked up a small group of them. I have 8 currently. They're still acclimated into captivity, and I'm still working on getting them wormed and hydrated. So they still have a little ways to go. If anyone's dealt with imports before, you always buy more than you need, unfortunately, because you're going to have some mortality in your average situation. But so far they're doing well, and I hopefully have at least a male and a female in the group, and I'll be able to produce some offspring here the next couple of years.
So this is a question for both of you, but are there any future planned projects for either of your collections?
So for me, I have a few projects that I've been growing up over the last few years, and I'm kind of excited to see produce. So I have some yellowtail crebos that won't produce this year. They're still a little small, but possibly next year my female will be up to size. I've been very very cautious in raising them up. You always hear horror stories about crebos and the regurgitation issues. So I keep the prey size very, very small. I feed sparingly. I do feed twice a week, but extremely small prey items. And I've been sticking mainly to frog and lizard prey, to try and mimic more of their natural diet. So my animals are now where I believe are going on 2 years old, but they're still, my female, I would say maybe next year, but probably the year after, when I'll officially first breed them. So that's kind of exciting for me. I have a group of false water cobras that I'm growing up that will be breeding size here shortly. But I think one of the projects I'm most excited about is really expanding my monitor collection, and really producing a wide variety of monitor lizards.
What about you, Josiah?
So I hate to be a downer here, but I'm definitely looking pretty closely at what's going to happen with this America Competes Act, just because, if I produce 1,000 newt babies, they're not going to be ready to go until the end of summer. And if they're landlocked in Ohio, then, it's going to take me 20 years to sell them all here. So, I'm definitely weighing my options. I am, they are laying, and I'm starting to raise some stuff up. But as far as expanding, probably not going to expand too much. I mean, if I hate to entertain the idea, but just because it's a very real possibility, I mean, I probably won't downsize if the bill passes, but I will I will produce a lot less animals. So I'm not looking to start anything too crazy. Now, I do have a few species that are rather small still, some young offspring that I have some emperor newts that are, just a year old. I have some and crocodile newts that aren't old enough to breed yet. Some Lao 40 newts that are babies. Some species that I would like to try and breed in the future. So, I mean, I'll still work with some of those and raise them up just to have the opportunity to see them reproduce. But as far as anything new, I'm probably not going to go too crazy. Let's say that. And honestly, acquiring new newts and salamanders is just kind of challenging right now as it is. There's just not a lot being offered. So, like, the stuff that I do have, like, I've just had to be kind of opportunistic in the right place at the right time to pick up. So even if there was a project I wanted to start, doesn't necessarily mean I would be able to just because of availability.
Gotcha. So, anything else you guys want to talk about?
Well, what else do you want to know?
I don't know. I think I've known you guys for so long that I feel like I've had discuss a lot of stuff with you, so I don't know what's new or not, if that makes any sense.
No, I think that's fair.
So, I mean, but then again, it isn't really for me, it's for the audience, so.
Right. You got any more good stories from overseas, Micah, you want to share? I know I kind of just talked real briefly about that, but I mean, since that was a big part in where we ended up, there might be some, I don't know, there might be something else good. There's just sometimes it seems like a little bit of a blur.
It does. I mean, I think for one, it's a miracle that we're still alive. And when you look back, some of the things that we did, I still remember at Tinka going around, and we used to. So I don't know if you're familiar, but there's a group of swallows, an old world group. They're called sawwing swallows, and they nest in banks. So as kids, we would, at this spot, there was like kind of a lot of open clay on this mountainside, and the birds would nest it and tunnel in. And we would go along, we'd put our hands in the holes, and we'd pull out the babies and play with them and then put them back. But that's how it started. But then we found out that if you put your hands in holes, there's animals at the other side, right? So we were just going around this mountainside, and every hole we saw, we were sticking our hands into and trying to pull things out. And as you can imagine, it ended interestingly. So we came to one hole, and I was putting my hand down there, and I'm like, I think I feel something furry. My friend was, my friend's like, no, it can't be furry. So he put his hand down in there, and he's like, yeah, it does feel furry. So then I put my hand back in there, grabbed it, pulled it out, and it was this massive tarantula. That probably, like, looking back, was probably one of the horned baboons, which is a hyper aggressive, highly venomous species. And just the fact that it didn't bite us is a miracle, right?
Yeah.
The fact that we didn't find a cobra or anything. Now looking back, we ended up digging that hole out to see if we could find anything else, and there was a fresh molt in there. So the tarantula had freshly molted, it's still soft, so it didn't have the ability to bite, which is a miracle in and of itself. But just thinking back, like, how did we survive doing things like that? Like in West Africa, where there are a large population of venomous snakes. horned baboons, tarantulas. Who knows what else could have been down there, But just kind of show you the childhood that we had. It was quite the experience. We found quite a few different things. At that same mountain, we came across a fairly large rock python that was like curled up on a hillside. We were climbing up, and we both like put our heads up over the edge, and that python was just sat there right on the edge looking at us. And so, being 6 years old, we just went screaming, running down the hill for our parents. A few years later, I probably would have tried to catch it, but I'm trying to think of if there are any other crazy stories.
Did you guys have a dog that killed a cobra or something like that?
Yeah, we did. Were you around for that, Josiah? Were you at school?
I was at boarding school. I did not experience that.
So, yeah, we were watching TV, and so we over there the electricity isn't reliable, so we use generator power. And we were having the light started flickering, so we went outside. My dad went outside to go fix it. And obviously, being a little kid, I went with him, and there was a cobra that was on the door to the garage. It was like trying to climb up the wall. And then when it saw us, it like in my mind, I thought the thing was coming after us, but it was probably just, saw us and then it wanted to escape. That's what snakes do. They want to get away from you. And so it came flying off the wall and it came right at us. So, my dad pushed me back inside and then shut the door. And then we grabbed some shovels, and when we ended up getting back out there, the dog had already grabbed it and had it behind the head, which is a pretty crazy story. Because as a general rule, when dogs try to catch cobras, the dogs end up dying. The Africans always say that cats kill more cobras than dogs do. But it was a spitting cobra, and he did get venom in his eyes. So he was blind for a few days and had like some irritation, but he killed it like a good boy, protecting his family.
So I guess you guys might have been a little too young at the time to do any serious herping, but what's some of the wild stuff you found over in Guinea?
So that's difficult to answer because actually the herpetoculture overseas is, especially in West Africa, is limited, right? And our knowledge, even at the time while we were over there, was limited for what we were seeing, what we were catching. There were obviously ball pythons, fire skinks, green bush snakes, which when we were kids, we thought they were green mambas. That tells you anything about our education. But lizard-wise, red-headed agamas were prolific over there.
Starting to sound like Miami.
Yeah, in some ways probably similar, except a little bit better. Nile monitors. But for reptiles, they're Senegal chameleons. Honestly, there were a lot of the smaller lizards, but in that culture over there, reptiles are seen as evil and dangerous. So if there was ever an animal, a snake found, it was killed. So really, we didn't see that many snakes growing up. At least, every once in a while we would come across one, but it wasn't really that common. We saw a lot more dead snakes than live snakes, where someone had found one and then they killed it, which is it's unfortunate. And there's also a lot of research that suggests that in areas where that's happening, that's part of the reason why your cobras are the most common snakes, right? Because they're the ones that can rebound from that kind of pressure. But yeah, it was, as far as snakes, I would say it was definitely a little bit limited. I'm trying to think, Josiah. Do you think outside of, I think we found maybe like one house snake. But the majority of the snakes we interacted with were dead, unfortunately.
Yeah, there were a few more over in the Ivory Coast. There were a lot more cobras over there. I mean, that's like the thing was we just didn't know what stuff was. I mean, there were these little snakes, that were out at night, and people would call them night adders, and so we just stayed away from them. But I mean, is that what they were? I mean, I have no idea. Is there even such a thing as a night adder?
Probably.
So yeah, I mean, a lot of it was just we didn't know.
Yeah, and all snakes were venomous, right? Like even there were quite a few different species of water snake over there. And granted, we still kind of messed with them a little bit, and some of them probably were extremely venomous.
Yeah, I remember.
But
I do
it's
remember.
tough looking back exactly what we were dealing with.
Yeah, I remember. Of course, I mean, as you said, like most of the snakes we saw were dead. And I'm not saying we didn't kill some too, because I do remember one time I did catch and kill this little water snake, and I brought it home in this little cup, and I was just kind of messing around with it. And when our neighbor was like, "Hey, if that snake bit you, you'd be dead in 2 hours, right?" But I mean, we still, have no idea what it was. Um, but even at that time, my interest definitely seemed to drift more towards the aquatics, because I remember being a lot more interested in the fish that were in the rivers, and like the amphibians that were around the water. There were a species of clawed frog that I remember finding that we thought were really cool. I think I found some kind of dwarf frog. I mean, at least that's how I remember it in my mind. But what it actually was, I mean, who knows? Probably one of the coolest ones we found. You remember that frog, Micah, that you let go?
I knew you were going to bring that up today.
So we found this frog, and I don't know what it was, but in our minds, this thing could jump probably half a mile. Like it, and even like thinking about it though, like it probably had one of the longest jumps I've ever seen in a frog. And
Yeah,
so we
it
brought,
was a very large frog.
yeah, we
It
caught
was. Sorry, go ahead.
Anyway, so we captured it and brought it home, and like we caught it on land, I'm pretty sure. But like I was like, well, it's a frog; it needs to go in the water. So I put it in this bucket, and I had to go to school. Micah wasn't in school yet, so I was like, hey, Micah, your job is going to be to watch this frog all day to make sure it doesn't get away. So I go off to school, come back, however many hours later, Micah's nowhere near the bucket. This frog is nowhere near the bucket. This thing was long gone. But it's just things like that. You're like, man, what was that? Like there's a real possibility it could be something that wasn't even described by science yet. And we'll just never know.
A possibility it was
It's true.
Goliath frog.
See, that's what we called it, Goliath frog. But considering where the Goliath frog range is and the habitat we caught it in, probably not a Goliath frog. But I mean, we were talking. It was a very large frog, and it had, yeah, like Josiah said, it had a jump that you couldn't even like imagine. Like, granted, we were small children at the time, but it would clear across the yard with a single leap. It was extremely impressive.
Yeah, it had some hops, as they say.
But yeah, hitting on the stuff that is still open to science. I remember around the Lambe Barrage, there are all these little pools, and finding we didn't know what they were at the time, but looking back, they were killifish, most likely killifish. The really bright reds and the blues, and they would appear in these little puddles that then would dry up. And then they would come back next year, right? So I would love to be able to go back out there, collect some of these animals and see what they actually were, maybe get something named after me. Mould eye, it just has a nice ring to it, But definitely, yeah, a lot of really cool experiences, and that's really why we are the way we are today, I suppose. That and my mother never let me keep a snake as a kid, so.
So
but now I have.
So now you have how many? What's the final count?
I could not even tell you, to be honest. I have, probably around 200 maybe. I don't know. I'm not going to put a number on it.
So you're kind of going through your rebellious teenage phase now.
Exactly, because I can afford to do it.
So you guys ever, since we're in West Africa, do you guys have any experience with the crocodilians they're found over there?
Not too much. So growing up, a really popular pet over there was a caiman. Obviously, there aren't any caimans native to West Africa. So looking back, from my perspective, I would say it's probably either the dwarf crocodile or the West African. I believe is it the slender snout? Is that correct?
Can you repeat that again?
For the species in West Africa, it's the West African slender snout. Is that correct?
Yeah, there's a West African slender snout, and there's also a West African dwarf. So
right, yeah, and I think a dwarf, thinking back on what they look like, but it's tough to say, and it's not something that was overly common. There were in a few rivers Nile crocodiles, I believe, is what at least what we would call them. They were pretty large, but not our interaction with crocodilians was rather limited. And then obviously, you can guess, where there were crocodilians, they were persecuted pretty heavily, except for maybe in some protected areas. So.
Yeah, those Niles you mentioned probably actually be West African crocs, so it'd be Crocodylus sucus. So
possibly, but I mean, looking back at them, even in the zoo in the Ivory Coast, they had an exhibit with Nile crocodiles that were collected in the Ivory Coast. So now maybe they were labeled incorrectly, but where does the Nile crocodile range end?
For all maps I've seen, it's probably somewhere in the Congo or Cameroon.
Right. I would say maps probably aren't accurate, though. So, if there's one thing I've learned, if you look at a geographical map in any field guide, it's not correct. just throwing that out there. And that's more from my years of birding. And birds obviously fly, so you're going to have a little bit greater range disparity. But take range with a grain of salt, I would say that. And then you have to factor in relic populations and then also just lack of research. I mean, West Africa is extremely under-researched. I think just this last year was the first time I've really seen any solid literature come out about West African herps. Or a solid book, at least.
Okay. Anything else you guys want to talk about?
What do you got, Josiah?
I don't know. I think I wasn't nearly as adventurous as you as a child. I think I was less likely to stick my hand in any holes in the side of a hill. So I probably don't have as many good stories.
I still have all my fingers, so.
But I have all my fingers still.
Well, both of you do, so it doesn't really make a difference.
Fair enough.
Do you remember in Tilly Millie when you caught that? Was it a cobra?
I mean, that's what they said. Yeah, we were like fishing, and I caught a little cobra, like some kind of water snake, and they told us it was a cobra, a water cobra. But
it was all black, right?
What's that?
It was all black, right?
I thought it had some red on it too.
Maybe it did. Well, that would make sense because I mean that's the spitting cobras are black with that red neck. But yeah, I just remember we were fishing with a piece of fish and that snake came out and grabbed it, and we were like at first we're all like, oh, this is so cool, and then we're all, well, what are we gonna do with this cobra? Like there's a cobra on the end of our line. So,
yeah,
crazy things, kids.
Well, guess this is a good place to cut it off then.
Yeah, I think so. I think, thanks for having us on. It's been fun talking, and maybe we can circle back around in a few years and we can talk a little bit more about our successes and our failures and our expansion. Or if this competes bill acts, maybe we'll talk about how we transitioned out of the reptile hobby. I guess one way or another.
Ability.
Yeah, depending if nukes go off in Ukraine or not.
Let's hope not.
I'd keep prepping, and we'll see what happens.
All right. Well, until next time, guys.
All right.
Yep.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.